Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't missiles or machine guns. Sometimes they're the quiet determination of a woman who refuses to be told what she cannot do. In a world where the roar of Apache helicopter blades drowns out whispered doubts, one pilot would prove that courage has no gender, and that some marks we carry tell stories more powerful than any Medal of Honor. Sarah Martinez never expected that a simple birthmark would change the course of military history. She certainly never imagined it would silence every man who ever told her that women don't belong in combat aircraft. But on a dusty airfield in Afghanistan, when an air marshal's weathered eyes caught sight of the crescent-shaped mark on her neck, everything she thought she knew about her past would unravel like smoke in the desert wind. This is the story of how a mocked dream became a legend, how a birthmark became a badge of honor, and how one woman's fight to fly the world's most deadly helicopter would reveal a truth that had been buried for 25 years. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against the cold chain-link fence, watching the massive Apache helicopter lift off from the military base. The thunderous roar of its twin engines sent vibrations through her 12-year-old chest. But she didn't step back. She never stepped back when it came to helicopters. "That's going to be me someday," she whispered to herself, her breath creating small clouds in the crisp morning air. The crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck, usually hidden beneath her collar, peeked out as she craned her head upward to follow the aircraft's path across the Texas sky. Her foster father, Mark Collins, placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, honey, maybe we should think about more realistic dreams. Girls don't usually fly those machines." Sarah turned to face him, her dark eyes blazing with the kind of determination that made adults uncomfortable. "Why not? I'm smart enough. I'm brave enough. And I'm going to be strong enough." Mark sighed, looking at this stubborn girl who had been placed in their care 3 years ago. Sarah had come to them with no memory of her early childhood, no family records, and only a worn military dog tag that belonged to someone named Elena Vasquez. Social services had explained that Sarah was found wandering alone after a car accident that killed her foster parents. The little girl's past was a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. "Let's just focus on getting through school first," Mark said gently, guiding her away from the fence. "There's plenty of time to figure out what you want to do when you grow up." But Sarah wasn't listening. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant speck of the Apache as it disappeared beyond the horizon. That night, she pulled out her notebook and wrote her first entry in what would become years of detailed research about military aviation, combat helicopters, and the requirements to become a pilot. Years passed, and Sarah's dream never wavered. In high school, she excelled in mathematics and physics while her classmates struggled with basic concepts. Her teachers praised her analytical mind and her ability to think three-dimensionally, skills that would later prove crucial in aviation. But when Sarah announced her intention to join the military and train as a helicopter pilot, the reactions were predictably discouraging. "Sarah, be realistic," her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, said during a meeting in her senior year. "Women in combat aviation is still very rare. Have you considered nursing? Or perhaps working in communications?" Sarah felt the familiar frustration building in her chest. "I don't want to be realistic. I want to fly Apaches. I've wanted this since I was 12 years old." Mrs. Patterson exchanged a look with Mark and his wife, Linda, who had accompanied Sarah to the meeting. "Honey, wanting something and being able to achieve it are two different things. The physical requirements alone." "I meet all the physical requirements," Sarah interrupted, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. "I've been training for this for 6 years. I run 8 miles every morning. I can do more pull-ups than most of the boys on the football team. I've been taking flying lessons with Mr. Rodriguez at the civilian airport since I turned 16. Linda leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, we just want you to have options. What if this doesn't work out? What if they don't accept you into the program?" "Then I'll keep trying until they do," Sarah said simply. "This isn't a backup plan for me. This is the plan." The day Sarah graduated from high school, she walked across the stage to accept her diploma wearing her hair pulled back in a tight bun, revealing the crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck that she had stopped hiding years ago. It was part of who she was, just like her dream of flying was part of who she was. 3 months later, she stood in line with dozens of other young recruits at the military entrance processing station, raising her right hand to take the oath of enlistment. The sergeant administering the oath was a weathered man with kind eyes who reminded Sarah of her foster father. "Do you solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic?" he asked. "I do," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong. As she signed her enlistment papers, the sergeant noticed her steady handwriting and confident demeanor. "What's your goal, Martinez? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" "Flying Apache helicopters, Sergeant," she replied without hesitation. The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "That's a tough road, especially for a woman. You sure you're ready for what that entails?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I've been ready my whole life, Sergeant." Basic training was exactly as difficult as Sarah had expected, but she had prepared for years. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, Sarah's daily training regimen had prepared her body for the challenges. While others panicked during high-stress scenarios, Sarah's mind remained clear and focused. But it was during the psychological evaluations that Sarah truly stood out. The military psychologist, Dr. Rebecca Chun, was impressed by Sarah's mental resilience and her ability to compartmentalize stress. "You have an unusual psychological profile, Martinez," Dr. Chun told her during their final session. "Your spatial reasoning scores are in the top 1%, and your stress response indicators suggest you'd perform well in high-pressure combat situations. Have you ever considered pilot training?" Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for, ma'am." Dr. Chun made several notes in Sarah's file. "I'm going to recommend you for advanced evaluations. The aviation program is highly competitive, but you have the kind of mind they're looking for." After basic training, Sarah was selected for advanced individual training in aviation. It was during this phase that she first encountered the institutional resistance that would follow her throughout her early military career. The flight instructor, Chief Warrant Officer James Morrison, was a 20-year veteran who made no secret of his opinion about women in combat aviation. "Martinez, I don't know what kind of strings you pulled to get into this program, but I want you to understand something," he said on her first day of flight training. "Flying helicopters isn't about being politically correct. It's about life and death. When you're in a combat zone with lives depending on you, nobody cares about your feelings getting hurt." Sarah stood at attention. "I understand, sir. I'm not here because of politics. I'm here because I want to serve, and I want to fly." Morrison circled around her like a predator examining prey. "We'll see about that. In my experience, women wash out of this program within the first month. The physical demands, the mental pressure, the combat scenarios, it's just too much." "Then, I guess I'll be the exception, sir," Sarah replied calmly. Morrison's laugh was harsh. "We'll see, Martinez. We'll see." The next 6 months were the most challenging of Sarah's life. Morrison seemed determined to prove his point about women in aviation, pushing Sarah harder than any other student in the program. He assigned her extra flying hours in difficult weather conditions, subjected her to more intense emergency scenarios, and criticized her performance with a level of scrutiny that bordered on harassment. But Sarah refused to break. Every challenge Morrison threw at her, she met head-on. When he scheduled her for night flying exercises in thunderstorms, she performed flawlessly. When he created mechanical failure scenarios during training flights, she handled them with cool professionalism. When he questioned her decisions during post-flight debriefs, she defended her choices with clear, logical explanations. The other students in the program began to notice. At first, they had shared Morrison's skepticism about having a woman in their ranks. But, as weeks passed, and Sarah continued to excel despite the additional pressure, their attitudes began to shift. "Damn, Martinez," said her training partner, Kevin Walsh, after she successfully completed a particularly difficult auto-rotation landing. "I don't know how you stay so calm under pressure. Morrison's been riding you harder than anyone, and you just keep performing." Sarah adjusted her helmet and prepared for their next training exercise. "I've wanted this my whole life, Walsh. Morrison can push as hard as he wants. I'm not going anywhere." It was during her final training evaluation that Sarah truly proved herself. The exercise was designed to simulate a combat rescue mission in hostile territory. Sarah would have to navigate through a series of obstacles while under simulated enemy fire, locate and extract a wounded soldier, and returned to base while dealing with a mechanical malfunction that Morrison would introduce at some point during the mission. Sarah approached the aircraft with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout her training. She completed her pre-flight inspection with meticulous attention to detail, then climbed into the cockpit of the training helicopter. As she went through her startup procedures, she felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with flying. This was where she belonged. The mission began smoothly. Sarah navigated through the obstacle course with precision, maintaining perfect altitude and airspeed while avoiding the simulated threats. She located the extraction point quickly and began her descent to pick up the wounded soldier. It was then that Morrison introduced the mechanical failure. The tail rotor began to malfunction, causing the helicopter to lose directional control. Most pilots in training would have panicked or called for an emergency landing. Instead, Sarah smoothly adjusted her flying technique to compensate for the failure, using a combination of forward airspeed and careful throttle control to maintain stability. Extraction complete. She reported calmly over the radio, having successfully loaded the wounded soldier. Returning to base with tail rotor malfunction. The flight back to base required every bit of Sarah's skill and training. She had to maintain precise control while dealing with the mechanical failure, navigate through more simulated threats, and execute a challenging landing with limited directional control. Throughout it all, her voice remained steady and professional. When Sarah finally shut down the engines after a perfect landing, Morrison approached the aircraft with an expression she had never seen before. For the first time in 6 months, he looked impressed. "Martinez," he said as she climbed out of the cockpit, "that was some of the finest flying I've seen from a trainee in 20 years. Most experienced pilots would have set down immediately after that tail rotor failure. But you completed the entire mission." Sarah removed her helmet, revealing the crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck that had become visible during the intensity of the flight. "Thank you, sir. I told you I wasn't going anywhere." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "You know what, Martinez? I think I was wrong about women in aviation. At least, I was wrong about you. You've got the right stuff." The graduation ceremony for Sarah's flight training class was held on a bright spring morning at Fort Rucker, Alabama. As she walked across the stage to receive her wings, Sarah felt the weight of years of preparation and determination finally paying off. She was now qualified to fly military helicopters, but her ultimate goal was still ahead of her. The Apache helicopter program was the most elite in military aviation. Only the very best pilots were selected for Apache training, and the washout rate was notoriously high. Sarah knew that getting accepted into the program would be even more challenging than her initial flight training, especially as a woman. Her commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, called her into her office a week after graduation. Hayes was one of only a handful of women to have achieved such high rank in military aviation, and Sarah had tremendous respect for her. "Congratulations on your performance in flight training, Martinez," Colonel Hayes said, reviewing Sarah's file. "Your instructors tell me you're exceptional." Chief Morrison was particularly impressed, and he's not easily impressed by anyone. "Thank you, ma'am. I gave it everything I had." Colonel Hayes looked up from the file. "I'm sure you did. Now, I see here that you've applied for Apache helicopter training. That's ambitious." Sarah straightened in her chair. "It's what I've wanted since I was 12 years old, ma'am. I know it's competitive, but I believe I'm ready for it. The Apache program isn't just competitive, Martinez. It's brutal. The training is intense, the aircraft is complex, and when you deploy, you'll be in some of the most dangerous situations our military faces. Are you certain this is what you want?" "Absolutely certain, ma'am." Colonel Hayes made several notes in Sarah's file. "I'm going to recommend you for the program, but I want you to understand something. You'll be one of very few women to attempt Apache training. There will be additional scrutiny, additional pressure, and, unfortunately, additional resistance from some quarters. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about all the years of people telling her that her dreams were unrealistic, all the challenges she had already faced and overcome. "I've been dealing with that my whole life, ma'am. I'm ready." "Good," Colonel Hayes said with a slight smile, "because I think you might just make it." 3 months later, Sarah received orders to report to Fort Hood, Texas, for Apache helicopter training. As she packed her belongings and prepared for the next phase of her military career, She pulled out the worn military dog tag that had been with her since childhood. Elena Vasquez, it read, along with a service number and blood type. Sarah had never stopped wondering about Elena Vasquez. Was she a relative? A family friend? Someone who had tried to protect her during whatever tragedy had erased her early memories? The answers seemed as distant as ever, but Sarah had learned to focus on the things she could control. She was about to begin training on the most sophisticated attack helicopter in the world. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about, was finally within reach. She carefully tucked the dog tag into her uniform pocket, close to her heart, and headed toward her future. Fort Hood sprawled across the Texas landscape like a small city dedicated to the art of war. Sarah Martinez stood at the gates of the Apache training facility, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her heart hammering with anticipation. After years of preparation, she was finally here. The Apache Training Brigade was housed in a complex of modern buildings surrounded by flight lines where the deadly helicopters sat like sleeping predators. Sarah had seen Apaches before, but being this close to so many of them was overwhelming. Each aircraft represented millions of dollars of sophisticated technology and years of human expertise condensed into a machine designed for one purpose: controlled destruction. "You must be Martinez," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall man in his 30s approaching, his flight suit marking him as an instructor. "I'm Major David Kramer, one of your instructors. Welcome to Apache School." Sarah snapped to attention. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here." Major Kramer studied her with curious eyes. "Relax, Martinez. We're pretty informal here when we're not flying. You're going to be spending the next 8 months with us, assuming you make it through the program. What's your background?" "Standard flight training at Fort Rucker, sir. Graduated top 5% of my class." "Impressive. Any prior helicopter experience before the military?" Sarah relaxed slightly. "Some civilian training on smaller aircraft, sir. I've been preparing for this since high school." Major Kramer nodded approvingly. "Good. That preparation is going to be important. The Apache isn't like anything you've flown before. It's not just a helicopter. It's a weapons system that happens to fly. Every system is designed around delivering precise firepower in combat situations." As they walked toward the administrative building, Major Kramer pointed out various aircraft on the flight line. "Those are AH-64D Longbow Apaches. Twin turboshaft engines, tandem seating, integrated weapons, and sensor systems. Maximum speed of about 180 miles per hour, service ceiling of 20,000 feet. But the real capability isn't in the performance specs, it's in the weapons systems." Sarah listened intently, absorbing every detail. "What kind of weapons load does it typically carry, sir?" "Depends on the mission. Hellfire missiles, Hydra rocket pods, and a 30mm chain gun with up to 1,200 rounds of ammunition. The Apache can engage targets at ranges exceeding 5 miles with precision that would have been impossible just a generation ago." They entered the administrative building, where Sarah would complete her in-processing. The walls were lined with photographs of Apache pilots and crews, most of them men. Sarah noticed immediately that she saw no pictures of female pilots, though she knew that a few women had completed the program over the years. "The training program is divided into 3 phases, Major Kramer explained as they walked. "Academic phase, basic flight training, and advanced tactical training. Each phase has specific requirements you must meet to continue. The washout rate is about 40%. Sarah felt a chill at those numbers, but her resolve remained firm. "What are the most common reasons people wash out, sir?" "Various factors. Some people can't handle the academic workload. The systems are incredibly complex, and you need to know them inside and out. Others struggle with the flight characteristics. The Apache handles very differently from training helicopters. But the biggest factor is usually the tactical phase. Flying an attack helicopter in simulated combat scenarios is unlike anything most pilots have experienced." They arrived at a classroom where Sarah would begin her in-processing briefing. About 20 other pilots were gathered, all men, all looking confident and eager. Conversation stopped when Sarah entered the room, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny. "Gentlemen and lady," Major Kramer announced, "this is your training class. You'll be together for the next 8 months, assuming you all make it through. I suggest you get to know each other, because you'll be depending on each other during tactical training. Sarah took a seat near the back of the classroom, nodding politely to the pilots around her. Most returned her greeting with professional courtesy, but she could sense the underlying skepticism. She was used to it by now. "I'm Captain Mike Stevens," said the pilot sitting next to her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to success. "Fort Campbell, 101st Airborne Division. You, Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. Just finished flight training at Fort Rucker." Stevens nodded. "Rucker's got a good program. What made you want to fly Apaches?" Sarah had answered this question hundreds of times, but she gave her standard response. "I've wanted to fly attack helicopters since I was a kid. The Apache is the best in the world." "No argument there," Stevens agreed. "Though it's definitely not for everyone. The training is intense, and the operational tempo once you get to a unit is pretty demanding." Before Sarah could respond, Major Kramer called the class to attention. "All right, people, let's get started. Welcome to AH-64 Apache Transition Training. Over the next 8 months, we're going to teach you to fly and fight in the most sophisticated attack helicopter ever built." He clicked a remote, and a large screen displayed a detailed cutaway diagram of an Apache helicopter. The AH-64 Apache is a twin-engine attack helicopter with a tandem cockpit for a crew of 2. The pilot sits in the rear seat, and the co-pilot gunner sits in the front seat. Both crew members can fly the aircraft and operate the weapons systems, though each has primary responsibilities. Sarah pulled out her notebook and began taking detailed notes, just as she had done throughout flight training. Around her, other pilots were doing the same, but she noticed that her note-taking was more thorough than most. The Apache's primary mission is to provide close air support for ground forces and to conduct anti-armor operations. It can also perform escort and security missions for other aircraft. The key to the Apache's effectiveness is its integrated systems approach. Everything from the engines to the weapons to the sensor systems is designed to work together seamlessly. Major Kramer spent the next 2 hours providing an overview of Apache capabilities and training requirements. Sarah absorbed every word, building on the research she had done independently over the years. This was exactly what she had been preparing for. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself eating alone at a corner table in the dining facility. She didn't mind the solitude. It gave her time to review her notes and mentally prepare for the afternoon session. She was halfway through her meal when Captain Stevens and 2 other pilots approached her table. "Mind if we join you?" Stevens asked. "Of course not," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty chairs. The other 2 pilots introduced themselves as Lieutenant Jake Morrison and Captain Tony Rodriguez. Morrison appeared to be a few years older than Sarah, with the weathered look of someone who had seen combat. Rodriguez was younger, probably fresh from flight training like Sarah. "So, Martinez," Morrison said, "Stevens tells me you just finished flight training. What made you choose Apaches?" Sarah sensed this wasn't just casual conversation. There was a testing quality to Morrison's tone that she had encountered before. "I've been interested in military aviation since I was young. The Apache represents the pinnacle of attack helicopter technology. That's what they all say in the brochures," Morrison replied with a slight smirk. "But flying these birds in combat is different from anything you learn in training. Have you ever been shot at?" "No," Sarah admitted. "But I don't think anyone in this class has actual combat experience with Apaches, or we wouldn't be here for training." Rodriguez laughed. "She's got a point, Jake. None of us know what we're getting into." Morrison's expression remained skeptical. "Maybe, but some of us have a better idea than others. Combat flying isn't just about technical skills. It's about making split-second decisions under extreme pressure while people are trying to kill you. Not everyone is cut out for that." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I guess we'll all find out during training." Stevens changed the subject, sensing the tension. "What's your background before the military, Martinez?" "Foster care system in Texas. My foster parents were supportive of my military goals." Sarah had learned to give brief, factual answers about her past without going into details about her missing memories or the mysterious dog tag. "Any family in the military?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah hesitated for a moment, thinking about the Elena Vasquez dog tag in her pocket. "Not that I know of." The conversation continued through lunch, and Sarah gradually relaxed as the other pilots seemed to accept her presence. She knew she would have to prove herself through performance rather than conversation, but starting with professional relationships would make the training easier. The afternoon session focused on Apache systems in detail. Major Kramer introduced the class to Chief Warrant Officer Patricia Williams, a senior maintenance officer who would teach them about the aircraft's mechanical systems. The Apache has two General Electric T-700 turboshaft engines, Chief Williams began, each producing about 1,700 shaft horsepower. These engines are designed for reliability in combat environments, but they're also complex machines that require careful maintenance and operation. Sarah found herself fascinated by the technical details. The Apache was like a flying computer with dozens of interconnected systems that had to work perfectly together. Engine management systems monitored performance and adjusted fuel flow automatically. Flight control computers helped stabilize the aircraft and reduced pilot workload. Weapons systems integrated targeting sensors with fire control computers to deliver precise strikes. The thing to remember, Chief Williams said, is that all these systems are designed to help you fight more effectively, but they're only as good as the pilot operating them. You need to understand how everything works so you can troubleshoot problems when they arise, and trust me, they will arise. After the systems overview, the class moved to a simulator facility where they would begin learning to operate Apache controls. The simulators were incredibly sophisticated, providing realistic visual displays and flight dynamics that closely matched the actual aircraft. Sarah climbed into her assigned simulator and immediately felt overwhelmed by the number of switches, displays, and controls surrounding her. The Apache cockpit was far more complex than anything she had experienced during flight training. Every surface seemed to have some kind of control or indicator. Take your time getting familiar with the cockpit layout, instructed Captain Janet Torres, one of the simulator instructors. Don't try to memorize everything at once. Focus on the primary flight controls and engine instruments for now. Sarah began systematically examining each control and display, comparing what she saw to the diagrams in her training manual. The collective control stick was similar to other helicopters she had flown, but it had additional switches and buttons for weapons and sensor systems. The cyclic stick had a complex array of controls at her fingertips for managing various aircraft systems. The Apache uses a different flight control system than you're used to, Captain Torres explained. It has stability augmentation that makes it easier to fly in some ways, but it also means the aircraft responds differently to control inputs. You'll need to develop new muscle memory. Sarah spent the next hour practicing basic control movements in the simulator, learning how the Apache responded to her inputs. It was indeed different from the training helicopters she was familiar with. The Apache felt more solid and stable, but also less immediate in its responses. "How's it feeling?" Captain Torres asked after Sarah completed a series of basic maneuvers. "Different, but manageable," Sarah replied. "The controls are more sensitive than I expected in some ways, but the stability systems help a lot." "Good. You're adapting faster than most students. Some people fight the different control responses, but you seem to be working with them." As the training day ended, Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The technical complexity was challenging, but it was exactly the kind of challenge she had been preparing for. She gathered her training materials and headed toward the dormitory where she would be living during the training program. The dormitories were standard military housing, with small single rooms that provided basic comfort and privacy. Sarah arranged her belongings and settled in for an evening of studying. The training materials were extensive, covering everything from basic aircraft systems to complex tactical scenarios. She was deep in study when someone knocked on her door. Sarah opened it to find Captain Stevens standing in the hallway with a serious expression. "Hey, Martinez, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" Stevens glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Look, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's been some talk among the guys about having a woman in the class." Sarah felt her heart sink slightly, though she wasn't entirely surprised. "What kind of talk?" "Nothing malicious, mostly. But some people are wondering if the standards are going to be different for you, if you're going to get special treatment, that sort of thing." Sarah appreciated Stephen's honesty, even though the news was disappointing. I don't want special treatment. I just want to be judged on my performance. That's what I figured. And, for what it's worth, I think most of the guys will come around once they see you fly. But, Morrison and a couple of others might give you a hard time. Just thought you should know. Thanks for the warning. I've dealt with skepticism before. Stevens nodded. Yeah, I imagine you have. Just remember that we're all here for the same reason. Everyone wants to succeed, and once people see that you're serious about it, most of the resistance will fade away. After Stevens left, Sarah returned to her studying with renewed determination. She had known that being one of the few women in Apache training would create additional challenges. The key was to perform so well that questions about her capabilities would become irrelevant. Over the next several weeks, the academic phase of training intensified. Sarah threw herself into learning every system, every procedure, every emergency response drill. She studied late into the night, often until the early hours of the morning, determined to master every aspect of Apache operations. The effort paid off. When the first major examination was administered, Sarah scored the highest grade in the class. Her performance in simulator training was equally impressive, with instructors noting her smooth adaptation to Apache flight characteristics and her quick mastery of complex procedures. Martinez, I need to see you after class, Major Kramer said following a particularly challenging simulator session on weapons systems employment. Sarah remained behind as the other students filed out, wondering if she had made some mistake during the exercise. Relax, Major Kramer said, noticing her concerned expression. You're not in trouble. Quite the opposite. Your performance has been exceptional so far. Top academic scores, excellent simulator evaluations. Your instructors are impressed. Sarah felt a wave of relief and pride. Thank you, sir. I've been working hard to meet the standards. You're exceeding the standards, not just meeting them. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. We're going to start actual flight training next week, and I want you to be prepared for a different level of scrutiny. Sarah's stomach tightened. What kind of scrutiny, sir? You're performing well enough that people are starting to take notice. That includes some people who aren't necessarily supportive of women in combat aviation. There may be attempts to find fault with your performance that wouldn't be applied to other students. Sarah had anticipated this possibility, but hearing it confirmed was still disheartening. What can I do about it, sir? Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Perform at such a high level that criticism becomes impossible to justify. And don't let anyone psych you out. You belong here, Martinez. Your performance proves that. The following Monday, Sarah walked out to the flight line for her first actual flight in an Apache helicopter. The aircraft looked even more intimidating up close, its angular lines and weapon systems creating an impression of barely contained lethality. She would be flying with Major Kramer as her instructor pilot, learning the basics of Apache flight operations. Pre-flight inspection is critical with the Apache, Major Kramer explained as they walked around the aircraft. This machine is too complex and too dangerous to take any shortcuts. We check everything, every time. Sarah followed along as Major Kramer demonstrated the inspection procedures, pointing out critical areas and explaining what to look for. The Apache had more systems to check than any aircraft she had flown before, from weapons pylons to sensor turrets to communication antennas. Remember, this isn't just your life depending on this aircraft, Major Kramer said as they completed the inspection. Once you deploy, you'll be responsible for the lives of ground troops who are counting on your support. A mechanical failure at the wrong moment could cost lives. Sarah nodded seriously. I understand, sir. I'll never compromise on safety. They climbed into the Apache's tandem cockpit, with Major Kramer in the front seat and Sarah in the pilot's seat behind him. The cockpit felt cramped compared to training helicopters, with displays and controls surrounding her on all sides. She began her pre-start procedures, methodically checking each system according to the checklist. Engine start, Major Kramer called out as Sarah engaged the starter for the first engine. The turbine began to wind up with a rising whine that built to a steady howl as fuel ignited and the engine reached operating speed. The second engine start was equally smooth, and soon both turbines were running at idle power. Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with flying, but amplified by the knowledge that she was finally in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter. All right, Martinez, this is your aircraft, Major Kramer said through the intercom. Let's see what you can do. Sarah gently pulled pitch with the collective, and the Apache lifted smoothly into a hover. The aircraft felt solid and stable beneath her, with none of the skittishness she had experienced in training helicopters. She made small control inputs, testing the aircraft's responses and getting a feel for its handling characteristics. "Excellent hover," Major Kramer commented. "You're adapting to the control responses very well. Let's try some forward flight." Sarah lowered the collective slightly and pushed the cyclic forward, transitioning the Apache into forward flight. The acceleration was impressive, and within seconds they were cruising across the Texas landscape at 120 knots. "The Apache has excellent performance," Major Kramer explained. "But remember that all this power and capability comes with responsibility. This aircraft can cause tremendous destruction if misused." They spent the next hour practicing basic flight maneuvers, with Sarah demonstrating steep turns, climbing, and descending flight, and various approach patterns. Her performance was smooth and confident, showing that her simulator training had prepared her well for the actual aircraft. "Outstanding first flight, Martinez," Major Kramer said as they returned to base. "You're handling the Apache like you've been flying it for months instead of 1 hour." Sarah felt a surge of pride and satisfaction as she brought the Apache to a gentle landing on the flight line. This was what she had been working toward for so many years, and it felt even better than she had imagined. As they shut down the engines and began post-flight procedures, Major Kramer made several notes in Sarah's training record. "I'm going to recommend you for accelerated progression to advanced maneuvers. You're ready for more challenging training." But as Sarah climbed out of the cockpit, she noticed Lieutenant Morrison and several other pilots watching from across the flight line. Morrison's expression was skeptical, and she could see him talking animatedly with the others. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language suggested he wasn't complimenting her flying. Sarah reminded herself of Major Kramer's advice: keep performing at a high level and let the results speak for themselves. She had just completed her first Apache flight successfully, and that was what mattered. There would be many more challenges ahead, but she was ready for them.